Hello guys, last year I took a look at a lot of cheap motors that you could get on eBay, and I've pretty much done the same thing again with a couple of new different motors. I was trying to get smaller motors, but I came across some other interesting motors. Like this one has two motors, so you can control the outputs individually. That could be good for the drive on a tractor maybe. And I also got some of these larger second-hand motors just because they have pretty big gearboxes. They should be pretty strong, so get an idea what they're like. Here's the first motor we're going to take a look at. This one cost $399, so probably a little bit expensive for buy most of these motors, but it's pretty small. I think it's about 6 millimeters. So 6 millimeters. The body is about 21, and then to the end of the output shaft about 24 and a half. So it's pretty small. That might be why it was maybe a little bit expensive. And it's according to the eBay seller, it's a 3 volt 30 milliamp motor. So we'll run it up to 3 volts and get a feel for what the torque of the motor is like. Okay, we have the motor wired up. I'll ramp up the voltage now and we see when it starts moving. It's actually moving already. We're at 0.37 volts and the motor is already turning. So it starts turning pretty soon, but it's easy to stop. So let's keep going. There's 1.5 volts. The motor is pretty slow, but it does seem to have quite a lot of torque, so it's a pretty strong motor. It's actually quite hard to stop that motor, so the gear ratio is obviously it's obviously got quite a good gear ratio there. We'll ramp it up to full voltage here, 3 volts. There's the 3 volts, and you can see it's not turning terribly quickly, but there's a huge amount of torque there. That's quite a strong motor. So at 3 volts this is only drawing about 30 milliamps, and if I load it down it's gone up to about 55, mostly around about 50. So I don't know what the application of this motor was, but whatever it was, it obviously needed quite a lot of torque and didn't need to move very quickly. So that's a pretty good motor. It's just a little bit slow, but still, it's I'd say it'll come in pretty handy. I think I'll use this in my RC wrapper for my round bales, because the servos, I haven't found a servo that's small enough, but I'm pretty sure I could get away with just using this geared motor because it's pretty slow and seems to have a huge amount of torque. So I think it's pretty ideal for the job. Here's the next motor. This one cost $320, and according to the seller it works between 3 and 5 volts, and you get an RPM of 80 to 130 RPM. So sounds okay. Let's start ramping the voltage up. And it's kicked in there at about 2.25 volts, and 22 milliamps is what it's drawn, and you can stop that dead instantly, no problem. And the stall current was around about 70 milliamps, so that wasn't hard to stop at all. Let's go up to 3 volts. There's 3 volts. You can just stop that straight away again. So there's 5 volts, and you can stop that and it'll draw about 120 milliamps. So it's obviously a lot noisier than the other motor was, and it has nowhere near the same torque, but again it's a lot faster, so you probably have a use for that in something. I'm not sure. It might be able to drive a light tractor model. I don't think you'd pull very much with it. The next motor I have here is obviously from a RC helicopter. So this is obviously not going to have very much power. Just going to be a little fast little motor. So we'll hook it up anyway. I don't know what I couldn't find the listing for this, how much I paid or any of the voltages or that, but we'll assume it's probably okay to about 3 volts, because I'd say RC helicopter with this would have a 3.7 volt battery. Let's power this one up and see what it's like. Well, it started spinning there at 0.16 volts. It's a rather noisy little motor. Obviously easy to stop because there's no gearbox really. It's quite a noisy little gearbox. Drawing about 160 milliamps stall current. To be honest, it's probably a little too fast for anything we could use it for. I think I just can't think of anything that would require a motor spinning that fast on one of our models. So this little RC helicopter motor is probably no use to us really. It's just too weak and too fast. Here's the next motors. I got the two of these for $290 I think, and they are 3 volt motors. According to the eBay seller, they'll take 100 milliamps and 540 at stall. So they're obviously bigger motors than what we've been looking at so far. And according to the eBay seller, it's a 1300 RPM motor, which kind of seems a bit ridiculous. So we'll have to hook it up and see how it performs. I'm hoping that this one turns out to be a very good motor, because if you can see, there is 2 output shafts and 2 motors. So what I'm thinking is maybe this would be useful as a way of creating a differential type effect in the in a tractor. So maybe we can drive each rear wheel with one of these motors, and hopefully their combined power would be enough to drive a tractor. Now I will expect it to be a small tractor. I don't expect these to be very powerful motors, but we'll give it a go and see what they're like. Okay, we start to ramp the voltage up now, and that started about 0.7 I think. Well, we say around about 1 volt it starts to move. So here's 1 volt, and stop that instantly. And maybe the eBay seller's 13 RPM wasn't crazy after all, because that's moving pretty quick already. So let's ramp it up to 3 volts. So there's 3 volts, and you can see that is going very, very quickly, and you can stop that very easily. At 3 volts it's drawn 140 milliamps, and if I load it down it's at 350 milliamps. As you can see, that is way too fast for an RC tractor, and it obviously doesn't have the torque that we would need. It's way too easy to stop. So although that looked like a good choice of motor, it's unfortunately just too fast and too weak for this application. But maybe there's something else you can do with it. Well, the next motor looks to be a recycled motor, and it cost $274, which is pretty cheap considering it looks like a pretty strong motor. The eBay seller has it advertised as 6 volts, 35 milliamps at 68 RPM. Now, that doesn't seem very high current, but we'll test it out now and see. Obviously you can see here this flat flex cable, it was obviously just cut out of some device. That's okay though. I mean, pretty good motor. I'd say you'd have to, well, it looks like a pretty good motor, so I'd say you'd have to pay quite a bit to get a motor like this. This is going to be a little bit harder to record because it doesn't have the connections on the back of the motor to connect to, so hopefully this will work. Here we go. At about 3 volts it starts to work, and it's drawn about 50 milliamps, and if we stall it, 140 milliamps. So let's go up to 6 volts. So there's 6 volts. That is pretty hard to stop, and it was drawn about 200 milliamps. So that's a pretty strong motor there at 6 volts. I probably needed to operate around about here, around about 3 volts, because of a little bit of loss through the motor driver. And there, it doesn't have a lot of current, it starts to stall. So I was hoping to drive it around about 3 volts. That would be roughly the voltage after the motor driver, but that's obviously not going to work. You might have seen I was hoping to put this into my Smith Cargo Bull half pipe trailer. So I probably have to put a boost converter, so I'll have to boost the voltage from 3.7 volts up to maybe 6 volts to drive this inside that. Actually, the more I think about it, this motor is not the best choice for that. I definitely have N20 motors that are a lot harder to stop than this, and they also draw a lot less current and they're a lot smaller. So I'd probably switch to an N20 motor in the Cargo Bull trailer. The N20 motor works on a lower voltage as well, but it might be the added leverage of this gear that is making this seem to stall easier than the N20, because normally the N20 you just have the small shaft on it. So maybe we'll have a look at that. Here's a slightly better comparison. I got a gear on the N20 motor, and it's only drawn 20 milliamps running. This is at 3 volts, but obviously, as you can see, a lot easier to stop when you have the extra leverage of the gear. So let's go up to 6 volts. At 6 volts you can stop it, and it draws around 250 milliamps. So that's a better comparison. Those motors seem to be close enough to the same speed, and the N20 motor was pretty easy to stop when you had all this extra leverage on it. So this motor is probably not so bad really. Here's the last motor, and as you can see, this is a fairly strong looking motor. It has a big motor and a big gearbox, and pretty sure it's way too big for any model that we're going to be using, but let's give it a test anyway since we have it. So I'll up the voltage here. So that's around about 3 volts that this motor starts. This looks like another recycled motor too, and at 3 volts easy enough to stop. Let's go up to 6. I think this is good to 12. So at 6 you could draw it down a lot. At 12 volts we're only drawing 80 milliamps as we are, and there's no stopping that. That is very strong. So if you could fit a motor like that into something, well, you'd need to boost it to 12 volts. At 3.7, you know, it stops dead. It doesn't work there. It's not designed to work there really. So for us, this motor is just too big. I mean, you're not going to be using 12 volt battery packs. It's not, it wouldn't be normal. You're usually going to use about 3.7, maybe 7.4, but usually 3.7, and this motor is just not built to work around there. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look through some more eBay motors. This one was a bit of a disappointment. I had been hoping that would be a pretty good motor, but it's just too fast and too weak, so that was no good. These ones probably a little bit too big. This one might be usable, but whether it's worth the extra space to use this motor instead of using an N20 motor, I'm not 100% sure about that. I think the N20 motor is more compact, and that just makes it a better fit for most of our applications with these small vehicles. This one, not too surprisingly I suppose, was too weak, too fast. It's supposed to be the tail motor for an RC helicopter, so no surprise. These two on the other hand, these two are pretty good. This one particularly, this had a huge amount of torque for such a small little motor. Now it is really slow, so the applications will be limited, but still it's pretty good. This guy was pretty good too. The speed was pretty good on this motor, and although it probably has a lot less torque, but I'd guess if you're looking for motors for your 132 scale models, one of these two might be more useful. These other guys, not so good. They don't really suit the application, but still they're pretty good motors if you could if you had an application for them. Like you could probably use this in a little light RC car. That'd be pretty good. That's obviously an RC helicopter motor, so you can use that there. If you were doing, say, a 110 or 116 scale tractor, maybe this big 12 volt motor would be pretty good for that. So that's all I have for today. If you liked that video, make sure and hit the like button, and if you have any comments or suggestions, leave them below or post them in the forum. And that's pretty much everything, so thanks very much for watching.